Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video I would like to talk about this camera right here. It's the Canon EOS 60D. Now this camera has been out for quite a while now, I know, but it is a camera that still produces really nice results in my opinion, and it's also still very capable and very reliable. And in this video I would like to actually share with you my opinion on this camera. It's not a review, it's just my thoughts on this camera and why I still recommend it. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So the Canon EOS 60D, now this camera has been out for quite a while now, I know, probably way back in 2010. It was kind of like a little brother to the Canon EOS 7D, which I very much love and still have. And to be honest, this is a very capable camera, and you know, yes, there are some drawbacks here and there and limitations compared to the 7D, but it does still have a lot of features that even if you were to start photography today or using this camera as kind of like a fun camera or a backup camera to your professional camera, this camera would still deliver. And even if you're starting out photography for the first time, I think that this camera would still teach you a lot of photography because it has a lot of core essential features in this camera that you can learn a lot from, yet the sensor still produces great results that you can actually deliver some professional work with it. So in this video I'll be breaking down to three different sections. The first one is the ergonomics and the operational side of things, and then I'll be talking about the image quality for both photography and filmmaking, and then I'll be talking about my opinion, the conclusion, why I still recommend this camera to most of you guys. And yeah, let's first start with the ergonomics and the operational side of things. So the Canon EOS 60D, now this camera was kind of controversial, if I can say, at the time when it first launched, because usually semi-professional cameras are magnesium alloy, but this is kind of like a posh plastic pretty much. But in the same time, it's still very light, very rugged. When you press on the camera, it doesn't really dent backwards or squish into it. It's very tough plastic, you know, like with the lower end entry-level cameras like the 1000D line of cameras. When you kind of squish it really hard over here, you can actually dent it down or bend it down a little bit, but here it's just very solid and it's very nice. And talking about solid, the grip does feel also very solid and very comfortable in hands, although because I prefer something like the Canon EOS 7D grip, that line of cameras, I kind of wish that this was a little bit thicker, because over a long period of time of shooting, let's say 3 or 4 hours of shooting portrait with this camera or event with this camera, it can actually hurt this knuckle or this palm or wrist a little bit, but that's just what I'm used to. But I think for most people, they actually will prefer this grip. It's still very comfortable, it fits your hand like a glove. And while we're actually on the topic of the grip, on the side here it actually houses one card slot, which to be honest is fine. It's SD card. I would personally prefer CF cards, but I really know and understand why they actually put in this SD card slots right here. And I think for most of you it's actually a good thing, because you know, most of the computers actually has SD cards compared to CF cards. And down here we have really nice legendary LPE6 battery, and because of the fact that many accessories are using LPE6 batteries, you can actually have a pile of this battery for really cheaply, though be careful of the grade of LPE6 batteries you're actually buying, because some lower grades are actually really bad and it's also really bad for the camera, so be careful. But they are very accessible and very cheap to get nowadays, and yeah, it can be very compatible with some of your equipment, like your LED panels, your monitors that you're using with this. Some of them actually uses LPE6, so that's actually quite good. Otherwise, this camera is the first Canon DSLR to actually has this articulating, well, fully articulating screen, which I find quite nice, because I love doing composition with this screen, because with my other cameras, I also, yes, the mic is actually on this camera, I'm also used to creating my composition with the or framing with the articulating screen as well. Though for photography, I kind of wish it was just kind of like a flip up screen from the back, but that's just me personally. But it's also good when you're doing video as well. Other than that, I think I really like how the ports are laid out very nicely and kind of further to the front. So when you are actually articulating the screen here, it doesn't get in the way of other ports that would actually be in use, like your mic port or USB ports if you're actually tethering with this camera. And talking about tethering, you can actually tether the camera to your computer, which is great because you can actually see the bigger image of what you are actually capturing with the live view feed all the way to your computer. And the software is still up to date today, so that's actually pretty good. The camera can shoot at 5.3 frames per second, though in reality, if you're actually shooting, let's say with moving subjects and having AI servo autofocusing system, you can probably achieve around 4.5 frames per second to 5 frames per second. But yes, if you're just, shooting stills and not really caring a lot about the autofocusing points and your subjects really just mainly stay still, then yeah, it actually shoots at 3.5 frames per second. So there's that. The viewfinder in here is actually quite nice and bright, and I quite like it. And yeah, it only has 9 AF points, but they're all cross type, so I think that's also quite nice, which means it is relatively sensitive in low light, so you can actually use it in low light as well to a certain extent, or shoot in vertical orientation and we'll still get quite accurate autofocusing system. Though in low light, if you use it in low lights, you have to be careful if it's really in focus or not, because sometimes it can actually confirm that it's in focus, but it's really not. So just, especially when you're doing like nightscape in the city, just be careful, just either manual focus through live view or just really double autofocus it or like thrice autofocusing it, just to make sure it's really in focus. Because sometimes, yeah, in low light, it just can confirm that it's in focus, but it's in fact just a hair away. But otherwise, it's actually very capable, it's actually very accurate as well, and you can even use it in street photography. It's responsive enough, and you will not really miss your shots for most of the time. So that's very great. And the control layout, I actually very much like it as well, apart from the top LCD buttons up here, simply because on other Canon cameras, like even the 50D and before that, you have dual commands on the buttons up here, and ever since the 60D got released, it kind of sets the tone for the double-digit D line of cameras to have like only one command button here, and I feel like it's kind of a waste of function because you have 2 dials here essentially, and just adding like dual command to these functions would actually be great. Then you can actually control it with this dial and this dial as well. And talking about the back dial here, I personally don't like the implementation of this. I much prefer the joystick. That said, on the 70D, which I also had, the dial here was much better implemented because the buttons doesn't feel as squished together, even though it's kind of the same design. But with this, you need a little bit of force to even force the wheel or rotate the wheel here, that sometimes you feel like you can actually easily press on some of the buttons, whereas on the 70D, it's just the right amount of pressure that you don't feel like you would accidentally press on the D-pad here. On here, that's the downside, though bigger wheel than the 70D, but it's kind of like not as practical as the 70D. So I would say that having a joystick would have been a much better choice on this camera. But otherwise, everything is very nicely organized. You have your live view / record button up here as well, just directly at your fingertips, which is good. The 60D also has 1 custom mode up here so that you can customize your own mode for that mode. So that's actually quite nice to be more personalized. And talking about personalized, in the menu system, you can also personalize your menu, but the menu system itself is also very organized and very efficiently laid out, so you can actually go through the menu quite quickly and also know where and which function is really logically arranged. And yeah, it's just a very convenient menu, very well organized, very well designed, and also a very efficient menu system to actually navigate through. So that's quite nice as well. This camera also has electronic leveling, but unlike the 70D or unlike the 5D Mark III, the 7D, the viewfinder doesn't have the electronic leveling inside. You can only access your electronic leveling through the after the info screen or in the live view feature. I do wish that it would actually have one of those electronic leveling inside the actual viewfinder, but it doesn't. It comes later in the 70D, but yeah. Adding on, this camera is also weather sealed, as I mentioned earlier. I'm not light on my gear and have dropped it several times. And here's a proof that I'm quite rough on my gear. This actually came off. But yeah, there are also other scratches here and there, which you don't really see on the body simply because it is plastic. If it was like magnesium alloy, you would see like paint scrapping off already. But other than that, yeah, it's a very tough camera, and also it has very nice ergonomics. And for the age, the buffer in this camera is actually quite nice. You can shoot around 15 or 16 raw images per buffer, or around 55 or 58 JPEGs. I can't remember the precise number anymore, but around that area. So I think that for some simple photography, some simple sports photography, things like that, or moving portraits photography, or photographing your friends, your kids, what have you, you can actually do a decent amount of burst rate before the camera slows down, and you have to wait for the card to be fully right with the images, of course. So yeah, I think that you can really get a lot of things done with this camera. Of course, this camera doesn't have Wi-Fi, NFC, or Bluetooth, so you might need to get one of those SD cards that has Wi-Fi feature into the camera, so you can transfer the images wirelessly to your devices. But other than that, it's really a nice camera. The preamp in this camera though is not so good, so if you're recording audio with the external mic, it's much better than the mic from the camera, but it's still not as good as, let's say, if you were to record audio directly into a separate recorder and then match it up, sync it up later in post. So there's that. But for, you know, home video, family videos, I think the preamp is just good enough with external microphone. Then another point is back to the screen. The screen is actually bright enough to actually view in kind of bright sunlight, so that's actually pretty good. The color accuracy is pretty good. I actually just don't like how the actual physical screen is further away from the screen protector itself here, because it actually creates extra flaring. I just think that it would actually be much brighter if it was to be like directly close to the LCD itself. But yeah, other than that, the LCD actually still gives really nice, accurate colors. Of course, mine is a bit beaten up because I've used it for a long time, and also the corner of the display started to degrade a little bit. That said, if you pick like a mint condition of this camera or a better condition of this camera, the LCD will just be fine, to be honest with you, and you will not really have any problem with judging your images looking at the back LCD here. So yeah, there's that. And now into the image quality. The image quality on this camera is actually quite nice. The dynamic range is of course far behind modern cameras, but it will actually get the job done. So if you actually shoot RAW anyway, you shouldn't really have that much problem. You still can actually manipulate the camera, manipulate the images quite a little bit. You can still work with the files, like retrieving the shadows and the highlights quite nicely. Though if you're working low light, I wouldn't say don't really try to recover the shadows over 50%, because you're really going to be introducing a lot of noise. And talking about noise, I wouldn't really go higher than ISO 1600 on this camera when shooting in low light scene situation. Maybe get a brighter lenses to go with it, and it will just solve the problem, because you know the noise on here is very digital and it's not very pleasant once you encounter them. And if you're working, like especially professionally, I wouldn't go over 1600 or even 1250. But if it's only for like sharing with friends, family, things like that, I guess 2000 or 2500 ISO would be kind of okay on this camera. You can kind of still trade in the resolution with the denoising, because this camera has 18 megapixels. It's still great. Most let's say social media platforms still uses less than 2 megapixels. Let's say Facebook, Instagram, Flickr, what have you. They don't really require that much resolution, so you can always trade in some of the resolution to denoise your image, you know, in Lightroom or other editing software. And other than that, it's actually quite nice. The color science, the skin tone on this camera is great. The color depth is also great. And when you actually do post-processing, the colors actually behave the way you want it to behave, so that's good. Just don't heavily manipulate it simply because it's not like the modern cameras where the files would be more robust. So yeah, other than that, do be aware of moire and aliasing because this is a much older sensor. Of course, when it first came out, it was really okay. You know, it was kind of standard of what the camera in this caliber would actually deliver. But nowadays, I think the moire and aliasing effect really is more pronounced when compared to more modern cameras, of course. And this also applies even more pronounced in video mode. And talking about video mode, let me actually lead into video mode right now. The color science and everything is also pretty much like photography mode. It's very nice. It deals really nicely with complex skin tone. It actually renders the shadows and highlights actually quite nicely and naturally as well. Just be aware that the file isn't that robust in video mode because this was one of the first DSLRs that Canon came out with video features, and obviously they just wanted to have it out for people to just do some snapshots and do some home videos or some personal project videos, things like that. Not really something like that you would do huge color grading with, though if you want to install some sort of flat image profile on this camera, you can with the Canon EOS Utility software on your computer. I actually downloaded quite a few flat profiles for my Canon 5D Mark II, 5D Mark III, 5D Mark IV, and also my R cameras. But yeah, sorry, the mic is on the camera and I just bounced the camera. So if you hear a little boop, I'm sorry about that. But anyway, yeah. Just keep in mind you don't have a lot of high bit rates with this camera in video, but if you just need like a simple full HD video that will just get the job done without autofocusing system, of course, then this camera is great. Just of course be aware of the moire and aliasing and the low light situation. And if you're in super low light, I wouldn't really use the ISO over 1000. 1000 or even 800 is where I would really go the highest, because you will start seeing noise later on the bigger monitor when you're editing the video. That said, the video file is very nice and light, so it doesn't require a lot of computing to process. So yeah. And now to the conclusion. Well, this camera is, in my opinion, a very nice camera. It has a lot of core features, as I mentioned earlier, and that is something very good if you're just starting out in photography or using this camera for fun, because it just allows you to focus on what's in front of you, focus on your creation, focus on your moments, your stories, things like that, because it doesn't have a lot of technical features that would distract you otherwise. Because for example, something like with the more advanced cameras with so many other features, sometimes you just end up thinking about like, oh yeah, I can just use this feature to capture this, I can just use this feature to capture that. Whereas with this one, you just learn to just capture and just capture, you know. Your images will be more of conceptualization point of view, or more from the story point of view, rather than from the technicality point of view. And that is something that really promotes the more of the art side of photography, in my opinion. And yeah, it's just gonna create the image that you would just remember more, things like that, if that makes sense. If not, then I'm sorry. Otherwise, yeah, all the controls and everything are just very logically arranged, and they're all just at your fingertips. The camera itself is actually quite nice and light. It's also quite small, so you can actually carry it to so many places with you. You know, the battery life lasting for quite a while also means you can take it with you anywhere, and having that weather sealing will just, yeah, be a very beneficial point, assuming you actually also have weather sealed lenses with it as well. So yeah, overall I can't really nitpick so much. Of course, yes, there's simple technicality limitations that modern cameras will definitely have over this camera. So this camera having a much lower dynamic range, have 5.3 frames per second, which to a lot of people nowadays, not that much, but I guarantee you it's still more than enough in like general field of photography. I very much enjoy using this camera and definitely don't feel like it was missing out on the frames per second. The color science is great. And you have to think about the price point as well, between 130 to 200 euros. Of course, if you want even like a more mint condition, you're only spending like a tiny bit above that. But generally, on average, you can find this camera on eBay or on any other secondhand sites for around between 130 to 200 euros, and that is kind of a bargain. And if you do mount really nice lenses on here, let's say the 17 to 40 or other crop frame lenses even, then I think you can really output great results with this setup. And you can also, to a certain extent, do a lot of professional work with this camera. So yeah, it's just something to consider, because overall it has everything apart from wireless communication or autofocusing system in video mode, but otherwise it's a camera to really consider at this price point. And on another hand, this camera can also be a camera that you can experiment on because of the features that it has. And at the end of the day, if you don't like the camera, or you decided to, you know, ditch photography because it's not something for you, you can always sell it back for roughly the same price point or even higher in some cases. So yeah, it's just something to really consider, and I personally really highly recommend it. So otherwise, I actually would like to leave it here because this video is actually getting longer than I originally intended to actually film. So yeah, if you need a free photography guidebook, it's absolutely for free. It's on my website. The link is down in the description section below. I will not bombard you with any newsletter nonsense, so you don't need to submit your email address or anything. Just click and download. It's absolutely for a beginner, or if you have any questions or any suggestions or anything to contribute, any stories to share, feel free to comment in the comment section down below. So yeah, otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Stay safe, have fun shooting. Till next time, bye for now.